The room was alive with anticipation, a charged silence hanging just beneath polite applause. Every camera lens focused, every microphone live, every eye fixed on the stage. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward, mid-sentence, articulating a point about federal funding and state responsibility with clarity and authority. Her words flowed with precision, each phrase building momentum, each pause commanding attention. Then came the interruption. Senator Tammy Duckworth, her voice sharp and unanticipated, cut across the discussion. The words weren't polite or conversational. They carried the weight of authority, edged with judgment. The panel froze, the audience's murmurs halted midair, and the air itself seemed to tighten, as if the room were holding its collective breath. Duckworth's interruption was confident, rehearsed, a performance of control, yet it carried an unspoken challenge, a test of composure, a bid to unsettle a rising voice in Congress. Cameras zoomed instinctively, capturing every twitch, every raised brow, every flicker of recognition that this moment was anything but ordinary. Crockett paused, just for a heartbeat, letting the weight of the interruption settle over the crowd. Her eyes met Duckworth's, calm, measured, unflinching. The hush grew heavier, a tangible force pressing against the edges of the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, and social media feeds were already beginning to hum in anticipation. Every spectator sensed the electricity of something pivotal unfolding before them. The audience's attention shifted, drawn into a vortex of uncertainty. Would Crockett flinch? Would she falter under the unexpected power play? Or would the rising Congresswoman take control of the narrative, turning an attempted silencing into a defining moment? The silence stretched, charged, and cinematic, every second amplifying the stakes. Duckworth, usually unshakable, allowed a subtle hesitation, an almost imperceptible blink that hinted this confrontation was unlike any she had anticipated. The crowd leaned forward, the cameras lingered, and the room became a stage for something larger than policy or procedure, a clash of composure, power, and principle. But what Jasmine said next didn't just pause the debate, it stopped everyone in their tracks. The forum had been billed as a serious discussion on federal policy and state representation, a space where elected officials could dissect complex issues with expertise and mutual respect. Instead, it had become a stage for spectacle. Senator Tammy Duckworth, seated with a poised yet commanding presence, had come prepared not just to debate policy, but to assert her authority. Her questions, once framed as inquiries, now carried the weight of judgment. Each statement subtly questioned Crockett's experience, implying missteps or naivety, as if to suggest that her perspective was incomplete, untested, unworthy. Jasmine Crockett, however, was far from unprepared. She had spent years navigating rooms where her voice was the minority, where assumptions about age, gender, or race often tried to erase her presence. Yet here she was, center stage, facing not only policy scrutiny but a carefully crafted challenge to her credibility. Duckworth's interruptions were more than tactical. They were a signal to the room. This was a contest of authority, a test of who would control the narrative. The audience felt the tension immediately. Every glance, every subtle inflection, every pause carried significance. Observers could sense the underlying stakes. This was no longer about federal funding formulas or legislative nuances. This was about representation, about who gets heard when power and identity collide. The subtle undercurrents of gender and race made the room thrum with quiet tension. A woman of color in Congress, speaking truth to a senior senator, was being measured not just for what she said, but for the audacity of her presence. Duckworth's voice rose, deliberate yet controlled, framing Crockett as idealistic but inexperienced. The crowd shifted in their seats. Some leaned forward, waiting for Crockett to respond. Others exchanged glances, recognizing the familiar dynamics of dominance and challenge. The moderators, trying to maintain order, found themselves caught in the subtle power play, the questions stacking like invisible weights on Crockett's shoulders. Every word from Duckworth was a calculated move, a chess piece positioning, intended to unsettle, to provoke, to test composure under pressure. And yet, Crockett did not flinch. Beneath her calm exterior, a quiet resolve built like a storm. Every interruption only sharpened her focus. Every insinuation against her expertise became fuel, not a deterrent. In that moment, she embodied more than her policy knowledge. She represented all the voices historically sidelined, those often drowned out by louder, more established authority. The room, initially swept into Duckworth's momentum, began to sense that this encounter would not unfold as expected. The stakes were now unmistakable. This confrontation was not merely a debate. It was a statement about power, fairness, and visibility. Crockett's ability to remain poised in the face of challenge would determine the trajectory of the room, the narrative of the forum, and ultimately, the viral reverberations that would spread far beyond that stage. She stayed silent for a moment, and in that silence, every eye in the room fixed on her. Senator Tammy Duckworth's career was one defined by both admiration and scrutiny. On one hand, she was respected for her resilience, her service, and her ability to navigate the corridors of power with strategic clarity. On the other, she had earned a reputation for being a sharp operator, someone who could assert control in even the most unpredictable environments. Observers noted that her interruptions were rarely accidental. They were tools, carefully calibrated to redirect conversations, emphasize authority, and unsettle her opponents. Her public persona exuded confidence. In press conferences, interviews, and televised debates, Duckworth projected calm mastery. Each phrase was deliberate, each gesture measured. Opponents often found themselves speaking over one another, scrambling to assert a point before she moved the conversation forward with the subtle precision of someone who had mastered the theater of politics. Behind that polished exterior lay a mind attuned to optics, a strategist who understood that perception could often outweigh substance. Her history offered countless examples. During previous debates, she had cut off legislators mid-sentence, framing interruptions as clarifying questions, a tactic that allowed her to dominate the room without seeming aggressive. In committee hearings, her tone could shift from soft diplomacy to incisive questioning in an instant, keeping witnesses and fellow senators alike on edge. Media coverage frequently highlighted these moments, portraying Duckworth as a figure who could maintain control under pressure, whose composure appeared unassailable. Yet behind the camera, behind the carefully constructed image, Duckworth's political maneuvering was even more calculated. Staffers recounted the hours spent rehearsing responses, anticipating challenges, and planning subtle ways to regain the upper hand when discussions threatened to veer off script. Her reputation for efficiency was matched only by her expectation of absolute control over both message and environment. Those who underestimated her often found that misstep costly. Her interventions, though smooth and understated, were rarely without impact. Irony, however, was embedded in this mastery. The very techniques that allowed her to assert authority, calibrated interruptions, strategic dominance, public composure, also left her vulnerable to someone who could withstand them. Someone unshaken by theatrical moves, someone prepared not merely to respond, but to turn the room's energy against the expectation of dominance. Duckworth had spent years perfecting the art of control, yet her strength had a blind spot. Those who commanded attention through quiet, unwavering truth rather than calculated disruption. The duality of her persona was critical. On the surface, she was unshakable, a senator in full command of debate, a political figure capable of bending conversations to her advantage. Beneath it, every pause, every carefully framed challenge, was also an invitation for an opponent to test her limits. History had shown her opponents often faltered because they expected aggression to be met with aggression. Few had the composure to confront her with methodical clarity, to turn the weight of interruption into an opening for truth. As the audience watched on that day, few realized the significance of Duckworth's interruption. It was not merely a challenge to Crockett's statements. It was a manifestation of a career built on strategic dominance. Every gesture, every inflection, every piercing glance was part of a calculated pattern. And yet, as with all patterns, there existed the possibility of disruption. But Duckworth's usual command was about to meet a force she had never anticipated: Jasmine Crockett's unwavering truth. Jasmine Crockett's story was one of persistence, resilience, and an unyielding commitment to justice. Born into a modest household, she learned early that every opportunity had to be earned, that every voice mattered, even when it seemed unheard. Her parents instilled in her a quiet confidence, a belief that integrity could never be compromised, and that the world would only respect what you were willing to defend. Those lessons would become the foundation for a career defined by courage in the face of challenge. From her earliest days in school, Crockett stood out not for seeking attention, but for the substance behind her words. Teachers noted her incisive thinking, her ability to dissect complex issues with precision, and her willingness to challenge assumptions. At the same time, she learned the subtle art of navigating spaces where she was underestimated, where her ideas were overlooked because of age, race, or gender. Each slight, each dismissal, became a lesson in patience and strategy, shaping a mindset that could turn adversity into strength. Her path into law was deliberate, a calling born from a desire to defend those whose voices were marginalized. Long nights studying statutes, preparing arguments, and advocating for clients who often had no other recourse honed her intellect and sharpened her resolve. Crockett quickly became known not only for her legal acumen, but for the moral clarity she brought into every case. She fought tirelessly for accountability, for fairness, and for systemic change, traits that would later define her approach in Congress. Entering the political arena, Crockett faced a new set of challenges. Public spaces, committee hearings, and televised debates often became arenas where her credibility was tested, not just through policy questions, but through implicit assumptions about her capability. She encountered interruptions, condescending remarks, and the subtle weight of expectations shaped by historical biases. And yet she learned to transform those experiences into preparation. Each challenge became a rehearsal, each slight a reminder of the composure and clarity required to command respect without conceding authenticity. Crockett's rise in Congress was marked by moments of quiet, understated brilliance. Her speeches, carefully crafted and deliberate, revealed not just knowledge of legislation, but an understanding of narrative, of the way words could shape public perception. She understood that leadership was not measured solely by loudness or spectacle, but by the ability to anchor discussions in truth, to insist on accountability while maintaining dignity. Those who had tried to belittle her early in her career now found themselves facing a legislator whose authority was both earned and unassailable. Her advocacy extended beyond the chambers of Congress. Crockett consistently engaged with communities, understanding that policy was not abstract but a lived experience for millions of Americans. Whether addressing issues of justice, immigration, or civil rights, she brought a perspective informed by experience, empathy, and an unflinching commitment to fairness. It was this combination of legal expertise, lived experience, and moral clarity that would prepare her for moments when public confrontation was inevitable. The culmination of her journey was not a single speech, a single case, or even a legislative victory. It was the sum of countless instances in which she had been underestimated, interrupted, or dismissed, each one reinforcing her resilience, sharpening her focus, and solidifying her confidence. Crockett had learned that presence, poise, and preparation could outlast even the most aggressive attempts at domination. Every courtroom challenge, every policy debate, every forum where she had been tested contributed to a readiness that few could anticipate. And when the cameras rolled, all her years of preparation and resilience came into a single, defining moment. The moment the debate resumed, the atmosphere was electric. Senator Tammy Duckworth leaned into her role as challenger. Her questions sharpened, her tone deliberate, designed to unsettle. Each statement was precise, a calibrated strike aimed at undermining Crockett's assertions and testing her composure. She spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to controlling dialogue, expecting hesitation or a misstep from her opponent. Crockett, however, remained unshaken. Her posture was calm, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. Every interruption from Duckworth was met not with panic or defensiveness, but with measured patience, a clear signal that she understood the stakes and refused to be rattled. The audience, sensing the tension, leaned forward collectively, their eyes shifting between the two figures on stage. Whispers rippled through the room as observers tried to predict who would break first, who would seize the upper hand in this clash of wills. The moderator attempted to maintain order, but the energy in the room was beyond simple management. Duckworth pressed harder, reiterating points, rephrasing challenges, her tone carrying both authority and impatience. Each time she raised her voice, the audience tensed. Each glance toward Crockett was a challenge thrown into the room like a gauntlet. Murmurs swelled, anticipation building like static before a storm. Every journalist, every camera, every observer felt the weight of the moment, the sense that history could be written in this exchange. Crockett's calmness contrasted sharply with the intensity surrounding her. Where Duckworth's words carried the force of confrontation, Crockett's restraint amplified the room's focus on her. She let the interruptions land, absorbed the pressure, and allowed the anticipation to rise. Her silence was not passive. It was tactical, a deliberate preparation for the decisive moment. The room seemed to contract around her composure, every second stretching longer, every eye glued to her face, waiting for the response that could tip the balance. Duckworth, sensing the subtle shift, attempted to regain momentum with sharper phrasing, sharper inflection, sharper focus. Yet the more she pushed, the more the room began to notice Crockett's mastery over the moment. There was a palpable tension between expectation and reality, the assumption that Duckworth's authority would dominate, and the unfolding reality that Crockett's poise was turning the energy against her challenger. The pause before Crockett spoke was cinematic in its intensity. The audience held its collective breath. The cameras lingered. The microphones captured the suspended silence. Every viewer, both in the room and through screens across the country, sensed that what came next would define the debate. This was more than a verbal exchange. It was a test of character, a battle of presence, a moment that would reverberate far beyond the forum itself. And then, she spoke. 7 words that flipped the conversation upside down. When Crockett finally spoke, it was not a rush of words, but a measured, deliberate articulation that commanded the room. Her voice, calm yet authoritative, carried a weight that immediately shifted the energy. Each syllable was intentional, each phrase constructed to dismantle Duckworth's assertions without raising her own volume unnecessarily. The audience leaned in instinctively, sensing that a pivotal moment was unfolding. A transformation from tension to revelation, from confrontation to clarity. She began by acknowledging the senator's position, a nod to decorum and experience before carefully dissecting the argument Duckworth had just pressed. "I understand the concerns about federal and state collaboration," Crockett began, her tone soft yet unwavering. "But asserting authority should never come at the expense of accuracy, representation, or respect for those whose voices are historically marginalized." The pause that followed was palpable. It gave the room a moment to absorb the weight of the statement. Cameras lingered on faces in the crowd, some shocked, some reflective, some nodding in quiet agreement. With each point, Crockett exposed the contradictions in Duckworth's arguments. She highlighted inconsistencies, using data and historical context to reinforce her position. Every time Duckworth attempted an interjection, Crockett's composed delivery absorbed the interruption, turning it back into a platform for truth rather than confrontation. The senator's confident demeanor wavered subtly. Small gestures betrayed the crack forming in her usually unflappable presentation. The room could feel the shift. What had begun as a display of dominance was now a stage for controlled, undeniable authority. The pacing of Crockett's response was cinematic. Pauses punctuated critical points, giving the audience time to react, to process, to internalize. At strategic moments, her gaze swept across the room, capturing attention without aggression. Each pause intensified suspense, allowing murmurs to swell, the subtle energy of anticipation becoming almost tangible. Audience members began exchanging glances, whispers spreading across the room, a collective recognition that they were witnessing a defining moment in political discourse. Outside the room, social media exploded. Hashtags began trending even before the debate concluded. "Sure Crockett clapback," "Sure truth over power," "Sure Duckworth exposed." Clips circulated instantly, each share amplifying the narrative. A rising Congresswoman standing firm against an experienced senator, dismantling arguments with grace and precision. Viral posts highlighted not just the content of Crockett's statements, but the embodiment of composure and moral authority that accompanied them. Tweets ranged from admiration for her intellect to shock at the sheer decisiveness of her delivery, each one capturing the moment in real time. As her argument unfolded, applause began to ripple through the room, hesitant at first, then growing into a wave of recognition. Some viewers stood, some clapped quietly, others exchanged smiles of acknowledgement. Duckworth attempted to regain control, speaking over Crockett's points, but the effect was minimal. The room had already shifted allegiance to the clarity and integrity of Crockett's presentation. The senator's usual tactics, calculated interruptions, subtle inflections, controlled dominance, were now neutralized by composure that was neither defensive nor reactive. Crockett's voice grew subtly stronger as she approached the crescendo of her argument. Each phrase landed with precision, each word a surgical strike against the inconsistencies she had highlighted. She painted a vision not of personal victory, but of principled leadership, where accountability and truth held precedence over theatrics and posturing. The audience responded organically, the room's energy swelling as her presence and rhetoric aligned perfectly with expectation-defying courage. In the final moments, she delivered her line, the rhetorical dagger wrapped in grace. The words were concise, powerful, and final, leaving no room for misinterpretation or rebuttal. Silence followed, an echo that seemed to stretch, emphasizing the gravity of the statement. The impact was instantaneous. Murmurs turned to exclamations, incredulity to admiration, doubt to acknowledgement. The room, once tense with anticipation, now pulsed with recognition of what had just occurred. The ripple effect was immediate. Clips were edited into highlight reels, shared across platforms, accompanied by commentary that reinforced the moment's significance. Viral memes circulated, capturing both the tension and the triumph. Influencers, journalists, and ordinary viewers alike engaged, debated, and praised the courage, intelligence, and unwavering composure displayed. Every social media interaction amplified the narrative. A congresswoman who turned an attempted public undermining into a masterclass of poise, strategy, and moral authority. The cameras continued to roll as Crockett concluded, her final words resonating not just in the forum, but in every stream, every screen, and every conversation that followed. The moment was cinematic, unforgettable, and unequivocally transformative. Even as she allowed a final pause, letting the room digest the impact, it was clear the stage had shifted. Authority had been challenged, dominance had been recalibrated, and a new benchmark for political confrontation had been established. The moment went viral before she even left the stage. The moment Crockett's words landed, the world outside the forum erupted. Social media feeds ignited in a frenzy of disbelief, admiration, and heated debate. Hashtags like "Your Crockett Clapback" and "Duckworth Exposed" began trending within minutes, each post a testament to the power of her composure and the precision of her rhetoric. Clips of the exchange circulated relentlessly. 6-second loops, slow-motion replays, captions emphasizing her poise and the senator's faltering, all amplifying the moment into a viral phenomenon that no one could ignore. On Twitter, viewers dissected every pause, every glance, every inflection. Analysts on YouTube and TikTok offered play-by-plays, highlighting how Crockett's calculated calmness had disarmed an otherwise seasoned politician. Memes spread like wildfire, portraying her not as a contestant in a debate, but as a symbol of dignity prevailing over assumed authority. Public sentiment divided, but even detractors could not deny the sheer precision and courage of her performance. Late-night commentary seized the narrative. Political talk shows and news panels replayed the confrontation, dissecting both the content of Crockett's arguments and the theatrical shift in the room's energy. Commentators marveled at how her measured approach transformed what could have been a minor interruption into a defining moment of accountability and strength. Interviews with political allies praised her restraint, her intelligence, and the courage required to face a high-profile senator in a setting designed for scrutiny and spectacle. Each expert opinion underscored the broader implications. This was more than a debate. It was a moment about representation, visibility, and the balance of power in American politics. Public opinion swung visibly in her favor. Citizens, activists, and students flooded social media with testimonials, stories of their own encounters with dismissal, prejudice, and undervaluation, drawing inspiration from Crockett's example. Her composure became a blueprint for standing firm in spaces where authority often seeks to overshadow or intimidate. The viral moment reinforced the idea that measured strength and intellectual clarity could disrupt even the most rehearsed strategies of dominance. The ripple effect extended beyond the immediate forum. Discussions began emerging about gender dynamics in politics, about the ways women, particularly women of color, navigate rooms historically dominated by seniority and tradition. Crockett's performance became a cultural touchpoint, a symbol of how authority and respect could be earned through mastery of knowledge, confidence, and ethical poise rather than through spectacle or volume. Her approach sparked debates in classrooms, community forums, and editorial pages, conversations about power, representation, and what it truly means to lead in a modern democracy. Meanwhile, Duckworth's allies scrambled to frame the encounter in more favorable terms, attempting to minimize the impact or reinterpret the narrative. Yet even their efforts only drew further attention to Crockett's poise. The contrast between attempted control and graceful dismantling of argument reinforced the story's virality. Each repost, each commentary, each reaction amplified the lesson. Power can be challenged not through aggression, but through clarity, dignity, and truth. The encounter transcended its immediate context, becoming a reference point in political discourse. It was a moment that reminded the public that influence is earned, and that authority, no matter how established, is never immune to challenge when faced with unwavering preparation and moral integrity. Activists and educators cited the exchange as an example of principled leadership, while ordinary citizens shared clips to inspire conversations about fairness, respect, and civic courage. But what Jasmine revealed afterward, off-camera, exposed an even deeper truth about this encounter. In the days following the debate, Crockett's reflections shifted the narrative from spectacle to substance. In interviews and statements, she emphasized that the confrontation was never about personal victory. It was about standing for principles that transcended any single exchange. She spoke of dignity, of measured restraint, and of leadership that prioritizes truth over theatrics. The message was clear: power is not measured by the ability to dominate others, but by the courage to uphold fairness and integrity in every arena. Crockett acknowledged the tension in the room, the anticipation, and the attempts to unsettle her. Yet she framed her calm not as passivity, but as deliberate strength. Remaining composed in the face of challenge allows the truth to speak for itself, she explained. Her words resonated widely, highlighting a form of leadership often overlooked, one that leverages patience, clarity, and moral conviction rather than volume or intimidation. This was a subtle yet profound lesson. In politics, as in life, enduring influence arises from authenticity and steadiness, not performance or aggression. Her reflections extended to broader societal truths. She connected her experience to themes of representation, visibility, and the challenges faced by women of color in spaces historically dominated by authority figures who expect conformity. Crockett's composure became emblematic of resilience cultivated through years of navigating systemic bias, personal doubt, and the pressure to perform. By framing the encounter as a moment of principle rather than triumph, she transformed a public confrontation into a lesson about justice, equity, and the enduring power of integrity. Viewers and commentators began to see the deeper implications. Crockett's approach demonstrated that leadership is not about defeating an opponent, but about inspiring a standard of accountability and respect. Her calmness spoke volumes, turning what could have been a fleeting viral moment into an enduring example of strategic and ethical strength. In classrooms, community discussions, and social media threads, the debate became a case study in navigating power dynamics with intelligence, composure, and courage. At the heart of her reflection was a universal truth. Bravery does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers through measured actions, through patience, through the refusal to respond in kind to aggression. Crockett's restraint became a blueprint, reminding the audience that strength is not in shouting over others, but in allowing one's convictions to resonate through quiet authority. Her insight reframed the entire encounter, elevating it from a political skirmish to a lesson in ethical leadership that anyone could carry into their own life. Crockett's integrity shone most in her refusal to demean her opponent, even as the exchange went viral. She made clear that her focus was never on humiliating Duckworth, but on demonstrating that dignity and accountability could outshine arrogance and interruption. This distinction between victorious spectacle and principled resolution was the cornerstone of the lesson. It showed viewers that true influence derives from character, not confrontation, and just when people thought the story was over, her final words reignited the conversation. The room that had once held its breath now carried a different energy, a quiet, reverent acknowledgement of a moment well earned. The silence that greeted Crockett's final words was no longer tension. It was recognition. Every eye in the forum, every camera, every viewer watching remotely felt the impact. Restraint had overpowered aggression. Integrity had outshone dominance. This was the moment the title promised. Senator Tammy Duckworth clashes with Jasmine Crockett. Her next line leaves the room silent. But it was more than a headline. It was a lesson in truth, in leadership, and in the enduring power of poise. Crockett had turned confrontation into clarity, challenge into conviction, leaving an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. Truth, as she demonstrated, resonates far beyond a single exchange. Calm, measured, and principled responses can dismantle arrogance in ways that shouting never could. The lesson is universal. Dignity carries weight, preparation commands respect, and courage manifests in moments when restraint feels hardest to maintain. As the cameras followed her final steps, Crockett walked off the stage with her head held high, her composure unbroken, a living testament to the power of integrity. Behind her, Duckworth's expression betrayed the subtle cracks of surprise and recalibration, a silent acknowledgement of the shift that had taken place. Now, it's your turn. Share this moment. Discuss it. Subscribe to stay connected to stories that celebrate courage and amplify voices like Crockett's. Be part of a movement that values truth over spectacle, composure over chaos, and principle over theatrics. The echo of that silence lingers, a reminder that in politics, as in life, the most powerful victories are often won quietly, but their impact resonates forever.